but also out of context. However, the discovery of natural gas in the East Mediterranean and the shift of the regulatory framework towards clean energy and a low-carbon future have deemed necessary for Southern Europe to rethink its energy model and, most importantly, its future. Bankernet, an affiliated member of one of the largest fuel traders and physical suppliers in the world, have found alignment with the consortia partners into a common understanding of the changing market condition in this new model to pursue sustainability in our sector of expertise. Bankernet, being the only fuel supplier actively participating on both Poseidon Med II and Synergy, aims to bring and deliver the know-how of our affiliated companies from Northern Europe that have already and successfully led the way in LNG bunkering. While Northern Europe is also making a slow start, our organization has already been supplying LNG to vessels trading in the area and is also investing in building a liquefaction plant in the port of Fredericia, Denmark. This plant will be transforming natural gas from the grid into LNG while supplying inland as well as the shipping market. Such projects can only serve to validate the significance of our joint efforts in the East Mediterranean. Bankernet remains committed to continue leading and serving the shipping industry as a pioneer for future developments. Our role in the consortia, together with our partners, is to co-invest in strengthening this platform to deliver a more viable, more clean and sustainable future to the vital sectors of marine transportation and energy. Finally, allow me to extend, on behalf of the consortia, our gratitude to everyone who helped organize today's event. Thank you, and again, welcome to Cyprus.
We now invite the Minister of Transport, Communication and Works, Mr. Marios Mitriadis, for his speech.
Ladies and gentlemen, Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Energy and friend Stegios, Thoma, from the Cyprus Shipping Chamber, dear associates, let me first start by thanking Bankernet and Grigoris personally for hosting this event. And I'm changing now the screen all the time, so I will do this. Sorry. For hosting this event today and for his personal invitation. I would also like to stress by stressing the importance of today's event for the Cyprus economy as it focuses on the use of alternative and more environmentally friendly forms of fuel, something central in the strategy of the European Union going forward. Actually, today's event fits in quite well with my priorities as Minister of Transport, Communication and Works. Transport, together with energy and information, are fundamental to the development and economic growth, both at national and pan-European level, and they mainly underpin competitiveness and help to create employment. Grigoris referred to the recent discovery of natural gas in Cyprus. In the next year or so, I'm sure that Stegios will mention later on that we're going to have a number of trees in Cyprus, and let's hope, of course, that we find even more gas. While shipping is one of the most carbon-efficient forms of transport, it still produces 3% of the world's total greenhouse gas emissions and 4% of total European Union emissions. Actually, whenever we go to the European Union transport councils, we do get a lot of pressure from the European Union to set even more ambitious targets in reducing emissions. Of course, as I always say, we should be careful not to kill the industry within the European Union. But it is a reality that the use of LNG will definitely help towards this direction. Higher marine fuel oil prices have made way to development of newer technologies based on fuels that are cost efficient, safe and friendly to the environment. LNG is a potential solution for meeting the environmental requirements. Also, meeting sea versus electric supply demands through renewable energy sources while at berth will also contribute to the reduction of emissions. I cannot stress, of course, how important are ports for islands such as Cyprus. Actually, all our trade comes through our ports. They are the primary entry and exit points for trade, and also connections between the European Union countries and the island's transportation network. In order to minimize the impact on the environment, ports and transportation, including shipping, need to perform efficiently. As well, we need the use of LNG in the transport sector to increase. It is clear that for Cyprus to meet these requirements, but also establish ourselves in these emerging fields, we need to form a clear long-term plan as how to exploit LNG for its transport needs based on a number of identified strategic issues. Improve the port infrastructure and provide support for LNG shipping at the current comprehensive 10T ports so that it becomes a part of the LNG trade network. And of course, in this aspect, the motorways of the sea could play a vital role. Investigate the most effective way to establish LNG bunkering at ports to fuel vessels using LNG as fuel. I think this is extremely important for Cyprus as well. We need to develop this form of bunkering. It is a form of bunkering of the future. Move towards a short-side electricity for the transport sector, including support to the shipping sector. Establish a comprehensive LNG distribution network in the hinterland to supply road transport and industry needs. Of course, this is more complex and it will take some time, but already we have started the use of alternative forms of fuel for the road industry. Form the necessary collaborations with other European member states and possibly third countries to ascertain that LNG demands are met and that peaks in demands are smoothed out. Also, we need to investigate how to become involved in the LNG secondary market. Gather information, knowledge, expertise, and best practices on the available and emerging alternative technologies on how to optimally achieve these strategic objectives. I would like to finish by congratulating once more our partners in the CY Energy, the Poseidon Med and the Element projects for the work they're undertaking in these fields, the Ministry of Energy, of course, and stress that their initiatives is evidence that we are making progress towards our strategic goals. Thank you very much. And I would like to excuse me because I have to go because of other commitments. I'm actually coming to Limassol again in the afternoon, so thank you very much.
We now move on to our first keynote speaker, Mr. George Polychroniou, Poseidon Med II Project Coordinator and Executive Director of Strategy Development, Administration and IT of the Public Gas Corporation.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure being again in Cyprus. First of all, I would like to congratulate and thank the organizers and especially BankerNet for the nice hospitality and the very good organization of this event. My presentation is an introduction to the use of LNG as marine fuel and a brief description of Poseidon Med II project, which is playing an active role in developing this highly dynamic market in the Southeast Med area. The driving force for the introduction of LNG as marine fuel is the recently adopted environmental regulation regarding the sulfur content of marine fuels. Ships trading in designated control areas, the so-called ECAs, have to use on board fuel oil with sulfur content less than 0.1% even from 2015. But this is a restriction applying in some specific areas, as I mentioned, mainly in Northern Europe and the coasts of North America. The recently adopted decision of the IMO regarding sulfur content in general, for general application from 1st January 2020 changes substantially the situation and obliges all the marine industry to comply. This regulation is an obligation for using fuels with sulfur content less than 0.5% from 1st January 2020 instead of 3.5% until then. How to comply with this regulation? There are three ways: either using traditional marine fuels with lower sulfur content than today, installation of scrubbers to process existing higher sulfur content fuels, or the introduction of LNG. Introduction of LNG, which is considered the the cleaner fuel in marine industry, as we will see. For sure, LNG will have to compete with low sulfur bunker fuels and scrubbers, as I said, and it is not easy to predict the outcome of this competition, especially in the longer term, but there are some interesting points to keep in mind. First of all, competition will depend on oil price level and LNG decoupling from oil prices. Lower oil prices are in favor of existing fuels. Higher oil prices are in favor of LNG utilization. LNG can secure compliance, this is important to remember, not only with global sulfur cap, which is the existing obligation, but also with potential further environmental restrictions regarding, for instance, nitrogen oxides, particulate matters, and CO2. Certainly, there is additional cost to use LNG, either for either new builds or converted vessels, but related investments can offer paybacks of less than 5 years. It is a common understanding that LNG is a suitable option, especially for smaller vessels, new builds, and vessels operating at relatively fixed route, like container vessels, ferries, and cruise ships. What is certain is that the recent IMO decision will boost construction of new LNG-fueled vessels. According to DNVGL, there are already 106 LNG-fueled ships in operation and 115 confirmed LNG-fueled new builds until 2024. It is also worth noting, as you can see in the map, that LNG-fueled ships already cover a large area also outside existing ECAs. You can see here the utilization of the routes of LNG-fueled ships. You can see that in Northern Europe, where existing ECAs, we have existing ECAs, there is the higher concentration, but also there is utilization of LNG-fueled ships in other areas of the world, and this will change also in the coming years, especially after 2020. What will be the LNG demand for bunkering based on the above is a big question mark. There are different views, very often diverging. A crucial parameter is the availability of the necessary infrastructure to deliver LNG supply chain. LNG supply chains need to grow sooner rather than later to maximize the opportunities for a quicker penetration for LNG. Just indicatively, and according to a Boston Consulting Group report of 2015, which is based on prediction for higher oil prices, I have to say, in 2030 LNG could have a share of 30% in total bunker fuel consumption. And let's come now to Poseidon Med II project. Poseidon Med II project, which I represent today, is an important project aiming to create the necessary conditions for the adoption of LNG as a marine fuel in Southeast Europe. It is a mega project, as we say, requiring the cooperation of 26 involved partners from 3 countries, Greece, Cyprus, and Italy, with an ultimate target to make LNG available in 6 core ports in the area, 4 ports in Greece, Piraeus, Patra, Igoumenitsa, and Iraklio, the port of Limassol, the main port of Cyprus, and the port of Venice. It is a project with a total budget of 53 million euro, co-financed by 50% by European Union through Connecting Europe Facility program. As I mentioned, 26 companies, partners are involved. Energy companies, DEPA, which is the coordinator of the program, DESFA, transmission system operator of Greece, which is the technical coordinator of the program, Bunkernet, our host company today, all involved ports, the 6 core ports I mentioned before, major shipping companies, other companies covering related aspects, class societies, Lloyd's Register, technical financial advisory companies, shipyards, and others. Which are the main activities in this program? The program, as I mentioned, aims in creating the necessary conditions for the adoption of this fuel. It covers 5 main topics related to the necessary infrastructure in Revithousa LNG terminal in Greece and all the related ports, vessel installations, regulatory issues, financial aspects, and of course, sustainability and synergies. Synergies is also in the title of today's event, and it is the most important parameter to ensure sustainability, having in mind the important cost of the necessary infrastructure, the main barrier to overcome in order to achieve market penetration of LNG is to face the typical chicken-egg problem in such cases, which is explained by the willingness of users to have availability of the new fuel and willingness of suppliers to have users, to have customers. How to solve this problem is, first of all, working in parallel in both supply and demand areas and create synergies. In other words, generate demand not only for bunkering, but also for other uses in larger or smaller scale, for instance, power generation, off-grid networks and customers, road transport, etc. And this comes to the last point of my presentation, Cyprus. Cyprus, as you know, for Cyprus, natural gas has not yet been introduced in the country, but this has to be done in the next few years until 2020 due to new environmental restrictions affecting large thermal power generation units. LNG is expected to reach the market through a new receiving terminal, FSRU, in the area of Vasilikos, to supply mainly the neighboring power generation units. This can be the starting point for a smaller scale LNG supply chain using trucks and or a smaller LNG feeder bunkering vessel, ensuring the penetration of LNG and natural gas in general in other market segments, including bunkering in the Limassol port. Closing my presentation, I would like to say on behalf of all partners of Poseidon Med project that we are pretty confident that LNG will lead future developments not only in transport, in marine transport, but also in the energy sector in Cyprus and the whole Southeast Europe area. Thank you very much.
Mr. Polychroniou. And now the Policy Officer of DG Move from the European Commission, Mr. Sobinski.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for your invitation to this highly interesting and timely event in Cyprus, in a beautiful surrounding, a place full of vessels, a place where we should actually talk about the motorways of the sea. My name is Wojtek Sopiński. I represent European Commission, Directorate General, obviously, for transport, called DG Move in our EU jargon. Today I also speak on behalf of Mr. Brian Simpson, who could not be here today, but who is the European Coordinator for Motorways of the Sea. I work in the department responsible for the implementation of the TEN-T policy, TEN-T, Trans-European Networks in Europe, and I am responsible for the maritime dimension of TEN-T. The policy, which we call the Motorways of the Sea, is aimed at supporting green, viable, and efficient sea-based transport links that are well integrated in the entire logistic and transport chain of the European Union. The policy is supported by, or was supported, as we have nearly spent all the budget, but the policy is supported by the Connecting Europe facility, a budget dedicated to transport. Later in the afternoon, we will be talking about CEF energy. There are actually 3 budgets in the context of CEF. I'm talking now about the budget dedicated to transport. We operate when we're implementing the CEF budget and implementing the TEN-T policy, we operate on the basis of the work program. And in the context of the motorways of the sea, I would have to mention 3 key priorities. First of all is environment. Second of all, integration of a maritime dimension into the logistic chain of land-based corridors. And lastly, safety and what we broadly describe as human element and training. And of course, the morning event is centered around Poseidon Med II project, a project co-financed from the CEF transport budget. It actually fits in the context of 2 priorities of the motorways of the sea policy, because this project is about the commercial application of the LNG in the maritime sector, and we like it very much in the European Commission because it relates to environment, it relates to reduced emissions. However, I would say that this project, Poseidon Med II, is also very much linked to the general discussion on how to improve the logistic infrastructure in Europe, the logistic and port infrastructure in Europe, and how to make a short sea shipping more robust, effective, commercially viable option that is better integrated with the land-based EU transport corridors. A little bit information on the EU in general, the picture in the context of the debate on maritime policy. The transition from fossil fuels to low-carbon energies, we believe in the Commission, gives the EU the opportunity to continue being a leader in innovative transport system technologies. And the role of LNG in achieving this goal is undeniable and in a way is reflected in several EU strategies, starting with the umbrella strategy of this European Commission under President Juncker on the Energy Union. I should also mention the low emission mobility strategy, and I have to also mention in the context of today's meeting the EU strategy for LNG and gas storage that actually covers a set of recommendations also in the transport sector. Among them, I could point out to two: a directive on alternative fuels, including the establishment of LNG refueling points across the TEN-T corridors and at maritime and inland ports. The other objective is to, for instance, establish a harmonized regulatory and standardization framework that would actually encourage the development of LNG in shipping. Strategically, LNG has the potential to reduce the environmental impacts in the transport sector. It was mentioned in the previous presentation, it can significantly reduce emissions of various pollutants, sulfur, nitrogen, particulate matters. It shall lead to lower operational fuel costs and reduced greenhouse emissions. Now, Poseidon Med II is a practical application of EU strategies that I have just mentioned. It actually offers a practical roadmap for a viable plan of bringing LNG as a safe, environmentally efficient and viable alternative fuel for shipping, helping, in the context of your region, East Mediterranean marine transportation, to actually propel towards the low carbon future. The action has a number of specially designed steps to follow, with the aim to facilitate the adoption of the regulatory framework, the extension of bunkering services, the design of and the extension of the LNG terminal in Greece, construction of a specific feeder vessel, and as well as the general examination of potential synergies with other uses for LNG. The action constitutes a wider benefit in the context of the MOS policy because it responds to international and European requirements of general reduction in sulfur emissions by 2020 to 0.5%. This project is about partnership and synergy. It involves 6 ports of the regions. It involves close cooperation between 3 EU member states. And most importantly, it is the project, we saw it on the previous slide, where we have a number of industrial stakeholders that are involved jointly in the conceptualization process, both, and this is very important, on technical and financial level, with the aim to create something viable, something constructive, something that would be long-lasting. And I would say that such an approach can only be welcome and should be applauded. LNG holds a great potential to build a greener profile of the shipping industry. There is a strong and undoubtful belief in that in the European Commission because it will improve your operational efficiency and, broadly speaking, in terms of large politics, it will reduce emissions. And what is sure is that the Commission will continue to strongly promote alternative energies through the EU funding and financial instruments. This is already the case under the CEF, the CEF Transport, CEF Energy. This is the case under Horizon 2020. This is the case in some funds related to European structural help. This is the case for European Fund for Strategic Investments. The Commission will also be doing its best to support the industry through constant dialogue with stakeholders and a number of regulatory on non-regulatory initiatives that helps the industry on one side to comply with applicable EU and global regulation, but also to help the industry to finance ambitious visions that you have. From my perspective, it would be crucial that in the future we sustain a significant budget dedicated to the maritime dimension of the transport, that it would be a real priority, and that actually CEF grants will remain a vital ingredient to link motorways of the sea with the TEN-T network. MOS has to be backed up with significant money in order to help the industry to comply with applicable regulations, encourage the industry to innovate, and develop the solutions that makes the whole sector greener, cleaner, and more effective, as is your case in the context of Poseidon Med I, Poseidon Med II project. Thank you very much.
And now I would like to call Mrs. Elpida Epaminonda, TEN-T and CEF Coordinator of the Ministry of Transport, Communication and Works.
Partners, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the lovely town of Lemesos. It's my hometown, and to today's event. There will be a lot of discussion on energy later on, a lot of presentations on CEF energy. My presentation is on the Trans-European Transport Network and the Connecting Europe facility. The Trans-European Network is part of national networks for all modes of transport that form a high-performance, interconnected and interoperable transport network to service the EU market. It consists of all modes of transport and other concepts such as the motorways of the sea, which is part of today's discussion, traffic management systems and navigation systems. TEN-T in Cyprus, during our accession in 2004, Cyprus had the network that you see on the screen now as a TEN-T network. It was basically our ports and airports and part of the road network, which was the Lemesos-Paphos motorways, Lemesos-Lefkosia motorway, and Kofinu-Larnaga. Priority projects during that period, 2007-2013, it was the motorways of the Sea of Southeast Europe. Cyprus also participated during the previous programming period, 2007-2013, in many projects. One of them was Poseidon Med I, and also many LNG projects. During 2009, there's been the revision of the TEN-T guidelines and also of the TEN-T network. Cyprus actively participated during the discussions of the establishment of the network. And on the monitor now you can see the new network, the new comprehensive network of TEN-T. Of that, the main network is the core network, which basically gets most of the money through the CEF, or rather the Connecting Europe facility, which has already been introduced to you from Mr. Sopinski during his presentation. Lemesos Port, and in particular Lemesos Port, the city center, the Terminal 1, and also the Vasiliko Port are the ports that, through Cyprus Ports Authority, participates in Synergy and Poseidon Med and Element. In addition to the core network, we have now, with the new TEN-T guidelines, 9 corridors and 2 corridors in addition to the 9, another 2 corridors. One of them is a corridor on the motorways of the sea, and another one on ERTMS. Cyprus participates on the Orient East Med corridor, which basically links Hamburg to Larnaca through Lemessos, Lefkosia. The Orient East Med corridor, you can see on the screen now the network that is included on that corridor, in addition to the port of Lemessos and also the airport of Larnaca. Now, together with the TEN-T guidelines, the Connecting Europe facility was established in order to fund this important network for the European Union. The total available funding budget for 2014-2020 is 30 billion. That amount is in actual fact separated into 3 sectors. The CEF sector, which gets the most money, is 24.05 billion. The CEF energy sector, which is more than 5 billion, and the CEF telecoms. In addition to the CEF budget, or rather this amount of money also includes innovative financial instruments, that the money that you can actually get through negotiations with the IB. Actions funded through the CEF 2014 until today. In transport, we have projects of a total budget of 83.7 million, out of which 55.2 is a CEF contribution. This is only for projects for Cyprus. It's not. It is the contribution that Cyprus gets, even if it's a multimodal project. Energy, a total budget of 43.1 million, with a CEF contribution of 22.3 million, and telecoms, a smaller budget of 4.2 million, with a CEF funding of 2.1 million. Cyprus participates in the transport section in 14 projects. 4 of these are national projects with CEF contribution of 47.5 million, and 10 are multinational projects with a CEF contribution of 7.7 million. Most of the funding is on works. It reaches 48.1 million for works and on the transport mode of roads. Here I have some of the projects that we have during this period. Poseidon Med, of course, which is we all know. The fresh food corridors, again, I think few of you know it. The STM validation project. The Element, of course, the Picasso project, another project to which Lemessos Port is participating. Other projects is the Synergy, that you will hear a lot about it later on today. And in the last course, CEF 2016, Cyprus secured funding to another 5 projects out of the 6 proposals we have submitted. This is basically what I wanted to say. Thank you so much.
Dr. Joseph Florentin, Technical Coordinator, Corporate Development Department Manager of Hellenic Gas Transmission System of DESFA.
Thank you, Stella. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am Joseph Florentin, Corporate Development Manager of DESFA, and PM2, Poseidon Med II Project Manager for my company. A role that gives me the advantage, the privilege to visit Cyprus for the 2nd time in 2 years. I would like to share with you some information and reflections stemming from our 2 years experience of Poseidon Med II program. These come out of the role of DESFA as technical coordinator of the program, responsible to monitor technical activities and in charge of ensuring quality of work and timely production of deliverables. And for this reason, the technical coordinator prepared an action quality plan agreed by members of the executive board, and an action time schedule which is regularly updated and discussed among the beneficiaries. This role was conferred to DESFA given its 17 years experience in LNG infrastructure operation, and also as DESFA operates an LNG storage close to the main LNG demand point that will be the port of Piraeus. Poseidon Med II is a comprehensive project with 17 activities. We will now focus at the technical ones, which cover the major part. There are activities addressing the legal and regulatory issues, and you are going to hear later on more on these. Activities on naval architecture design and assessment of shipyard preparedness. Very important activities at the end, if I may say, of the chain, focusing at allowing the demand for LNG bunkering to exist. And the infrastructure design for ports and Redithusa, which is a complex activity, mainly due to the fact that it also concerns people who have nothing to do with the energy business or the shipping industry, but live close to the projected areas for installation of small-scale LNG infrastructure. In this slide, we will present the relations between the various phases of design and indicate the steps where the authorities step in order to approve or reject designs, mainly on environmental and safety grounds. The first group comprises preliminary activities, site planning, safety studies, environmental studies, which feed in the pre-conceptual design and also the conceptual design coming subsequently, and also giving data for the proposal to update the port's master plans. Of course, these activities are interrelated, and finally they result to a proposal that has to be approved by the competent authorities. Once such approval is granted, then we have a relative certainty which allows us to proceed to the next phase of studies, supporting studies which feed in the preliminary engineering, and this gives data for the final safety and environmental studies. Then we have also a very important approval stage, which also involves a wide public consultation. So for this reason, it is a critical step, and once we are past this step, then we have the certainty which allows us to proceed to detailed studies and also the tender documents for construction, which are also the boundary limits of the Poseidon Med II program. According to our experience, risks in such projects may come from mainly two areas: permitting phases and tender procedures. Regarding the permitting risks, they may be related to the administration. The administration sometimes may not have the correct or tools or the experience to evaluate a specific project. For instance, the tools may be not suitable for the scale of the project examined, or may be outdated, or may have been tailored for a different kind of project. A second very important area is social acceptance. The economic development and the environmental gains of such a project, as the one dealt with in Poseidon Med II, is obvious. However, it has to override the aversion to new industrial installations, especially if those are close to inhabited areas. On the other hand, the fear created by the prospect of fuel storage installations may sometimes be exaggerated by persons serving other purposes than the general welfare. And of course, there is an interaction between social acceptance and the way the administration deals with the project. How can we mitigate those risks? There are not that many solutions. As we approach the phase of public consultation on environmental and social impact assessment for our projects, we need to educate both the authorities and the public. And for this reason, Poseidon Med has a dedicated activity named Public Awareness. We also need to avoid partisanship in order not to polarize attitudes that might lead to extreme reactions, and also prepare solid studies able to withstand any well-intentioned criticism. Regarding the tendering phase, the tendering procedures protect the budget, of course, but sometimes may jeopardize time schedules. And the public sector entities and the utilities may be bound by stricter procedures and external approvals, like the ones listed here. Mitigation measures, again, not many. Strict compliance with provisions. The experience shows that trying to take shortcuts may lead to being obliged to start the procedure from the very beginning. And also adequate transparency and public consultation. I may add, also build relations of trust with the authorities. Concluding my presentation, I would like to note that Poseidon Med II is a comprehensive action aiming at the adoption of LNG as a fuel by the shipping industry and by other users. These shall be achieved with quality of studies in all fields, cooperation with the administration, information and education of the stakeholders, and of course favorable economic conditions, but unfortunately we cannot very much influence them. That will be all for now from my side. Thank you for your attention.
We're now moving on to the first panel discussion entitled LNG Uptake Setting the Scene. And I would like to call the first panelist, Mr. Nikos Hadjigeorgiou, Dr. Christos Solomonidis, Mr. Arthur McQueenie, Mr. Karkoska, Mr. Steve Esso, and our moderator, Mr. Panagiotis Mitrou, Technology and Innovation Manager, Marine and Offshore South Europe, Lloyd's Register. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's nice to be here. It's nice to discuss about the prospect of LNG. We'll try to do it within the time constraints. So I will ask all my fellow panelists to be very constrained in time and be sure that those who will make it will get easier questions at the end. All right. So setting the scene on the LNG uptake issue, what we would like to see first of all, a key point here, LNG is already here, and we have to take notice of the fact that significant companies around the Mediterranean and of course Northern Europe, especially after the ECA regulation, have already proceeded with significant investments in the field of LNG uptake. So right now we have 3 major projects across the Mediterranean with more than 100 partner companies and more than 125 million euro dedicated to this investment. So the main body, the main project for the Eastern Mediterranean is Poseidon Med II, and this is what we're going to discuss today. So practically the LNG uptake is all about safety, the environment, the new market, national and regional opportunities like the one we see in Cyprus, and of course it's all about the future and what we're going to see, how we will be more efficient against future changes. Talking about safety, and this is a matter that we should keep high in the agenda, especially as we talk as LR, we need to be aware of the fact that the LNG as a product, as an energy commodity, in its supply chain and use, is one of the safest that we can see around the globe. So the best practices used in this sector are state-of-the-art across different streams. We have a very strong record already for decades, so it's not a new science there. We have sound safety procedures in place, perhaps the most documented one that we're going to see in bunkering for shipping whatsoever, and the risk-based approach, which tends to cover all the aspects as an umbrella and practically erase any residual risk there. So we have seen 1,000 LNG bunkering operations already being carried out. To be honest, at this moment we have many more than 1,000. And of course, we have to keep in mind that LNG is flammable in very constrained conditions. So LNG is not, in general, a very risky, a very dangerous commodity. And of course, what we do is that we exercise a specific methodology on covering all these risks. And this is something that is being done perhaps for the first time in bunkering operations and the use of any alternative fuel. With regard to the environment, we have to, I will be brief about it, we have to keep in mind LNG will practically extinct sulfur oxides and particulate matters. It will reduce up to an average of 50% nitrogen oxides, and it can also demonstrate performance, significant performance, which in conjunction with other uses like energy efficiency equipment, it could lead to a very good result of 50% in greenhouse gas minimization. So, on the other hand, we also have some concerns, and one of those concerns is methane slip. And what we want to say here is, based on the studies and the research globally and at IMO level, agreed and accepted, methane slip is an issue that can be managed, and technology will better solve this in the near future. So it is already manageable, but we're going to see this being extincted and out of the agenda in the future as the technology will progress. So the market is already there. We have seen numerous applications, ships, even ships being built in the Mediterranean, like for example Italy, like the FA Gautier you can see here up on your right. And of course, different kinds of ships, all using this alternative fuel. At the same time, the key point missing is the infrastructure. So for LNG bunkering, we're starting from scratch. This is a very difficult point. This is the reason why we're here. Otherwise, LNG would be a very affordable commodity to work with in shipping. So we have to keep in mind, though, that we don't have small scale, but the large scale is already there. We do energy technologies need to practically shift to LNG as well. And this is what we have seen within Poseidon Med. We've seen that, for example, Western Greece has no grid, and we could use the bunkering synergy to create a local grid there. And that would give a significant opportunity for the local community. Abundance of LNG is a key advantage, and we will see with market maturity more and more applications and more synergies and opportunities for its uptake. In this case, even though this is not a part of this project, the cruise companies and the cruise opportunity is there to also support bunkering. And we have seen many companies that want to shift to LNG for commercial but also societal reasons. And the fact that the cruise industry is somehow criticized about its environmental impact, but on the other hand is one of the most sensitive shipping segments, and they want to take measures. So LNG is one of those solutions. With Cyprus in mind in particular, we have to see what is the overall outlook of the area. So I'm going to talk a bit about the upstream opportunity as well. So we have 13 LNG terminals around Europe already, 8 in operation, and 1 FSRU already in Israel. Most probably, as we will also see today, 1 FSRU being potentially applied and installed in Cyprus. And on the other hand, we will also have 5 terminals under development. So we will have the chance to provide gas to regions which have no access to that. We'll have favorable LNG bunkering opportunities with liner and RoPax routes, as well as practically the Silk Road from Suez to Northern Europe. And we have proved fields in the area, proved fields which can realize a high potential in LNG uptake in the years to come. We will soon have the Egyptian export terminals with significant supply. And of course, we are island states that need to be more energy independent. Malta has already done it, and I think that Cyprus will be next. And of course, we have to keep in mind this is also for the local pollution issue is a great step ahead. So it is also for the local communities and their well-being. So practically, what we see 4 pillars that will dictate our decisions in the near future. We have the East Med case as we have seen it, with the large scale and the upstream potential materializing soon. We have the air emissions issue and the local pollution and policies on air emissions that will further be even more demanding in decades to come. We have the supply opportunity with the LNG market and the shale gas entering the market now. You can see a list of 20 terminals in the US waiting to get an export license. And of course, at the same time, we have decarbonization, which still poses a threat for LNG as since practically LNG remains a fossil fuel. The fossil fuel of choice, the best fossil fuel, the fossil fuel that perhaps should not be treated as one more fossil fuel, but it's still a fossil fuel. So what we see is that between traditional fossil fuels and the carbon neutral future, the LNG could bridge and lead to efficiency in decarbonization. And this is all that I wanted to talk about. So thank you very much for your attention.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Cyprus Ports Authority is a semi-governmental organization established by law in 1973. It is governed by a 9-member board of directors. The board applies government policy which is conveyed and supervised by the Minister of Transport, Communications and Works. CPA is the main investor in Cyprus ports, though a significant share of profitable port activities is carried out by the private sector. In this direction, the commercialization of Lemessos port has been concluded, and at this stage, the commercialization of Larnaca port and marina is in progress. Both processes are tasks assigned to the Ministry of Transport, Communications and Works. Within the framework of its business culture, the Cyprus Ports Authority has prepared its development plan, setting its strategic goals. The improvement and expansion of Lemessos Port, Terminal 2 Vasiliko, and the LNG ship bunkering at Lemessos Port Terminal 1 are among these strategic goals. For our guest who don't know where that is, I mean, Lemessos Port Terminal 2 Vasiliko, this slide shows the geographic location of the Lemessos Port Terminal 2 Vasiliko, which is situated in the southern part of Cyprus between Lemessos and Larnaca. Lemessos Port Terminal 2 Vasiliko is the main port for handling industrial types of cargo, such as dangerous cargo and humid fuels. CPA recognized from early on the importance of enhancing the port's efficiency and performance. Strategic plans were prepared so as to utilize in the best possible way the prospects generated from the development of liquefied natural gas in shipping and from the hydrocarbons found in the exclusive economic zone of the Republic of Cyprus. The outcome of the above was a firm decision to upgrade and extend the existing port in order to accommodate the new requirements. To facilitate the financing of this project, which has a very high development cost and consequently its implementation, CPA, along with other partners who share this goal, joined in a co-finance proposal. This is the Cyprus Gas 2 EU project, project of common interest that ends energy isolation of Cyprus, an EU member state. Here we can see the whole area of Vasiliko, including the existing works, the existing port, and the extension works as expected to be when completed. In other words, this slide represents the implementation of CPA's strategic goal regarding the area under its jurisdiction. Efforts are being made by the government to acquire the adjacent area on the north side of the extension, an area of 343,000 square meters, which will facilitate a number of forthcoming port operations. But let's see this development, which has to do with the extension of the port to the east, starting from the existing infrastructure as we know it today. Here is the existing port, the owner of which is CPA. Its operator is Vasiliko Cement Works Company, which has a lease of 50 years expiring at the end of 2033. West of the port, you can see the private jetty constructed by VTT Vasiliko Limited. Regarding the new works, a new 125-meter wide pier consisting of 3 berthing quays of 560 meters total length and a total storage area of about 22,000 square meters will be constructed at the position where the lee breakwater is now. You can see the lee breakwater under the new pier. The new quay pier will accommodate operations that need to be transferred from Larnaca port. These operations include loose and dirty cargo, such as the export of gypsum and other earth materials, and the import of corn and goods. Now, this pier design cost has been approved from the CEF Transport. As it is well known, a port needs to be protected from the sea waves, but it must also have the required navigation depths for the port basin, including the turning circle and the approach channel. For this, the main breakwater, the south, will be extended by 705 meters, while to achieve a complete all-around protection of the port, a lee side breakwater of 275 meters has to be constructed. On this slide, we can also see the area that has to be dredged to the depth of minus 15 meters. This area is of 300,000 square meters, giving a volume of almost 2 million cubic meters of dredged material, which will be disposed in the sea at a distance of 6 to 7 kilometers from the shore and in a depth of more than 200 meters. The exact location will be decided by the Department of Fisheries and Marine Research. Unfortunately, the geotechnical investigation that was carried out has shown that this material, this dredged material, is unsuitable to be used in backfilling works. Regarding the FSRU, floating storage regasification unit, and LNG carrier ships, which will be operating on DEFA's jetty, the port will provide shelter in situations of extreme weather conditions with high waves in the area. For their berthing, basic designs on the north side of the port basin were prepared by our consultants. In general, these consist of a group of individual structures of breasting and mooring dolphins supported on driven steel piles. Instead of that, CPA will avoid this intermediate stage of construction and proceed in the design and construction of quays to the north 400 meters long and to the east 200 meters long inside the lee breakwater. The emergency shelter for the FSRU and the LNG carrier vessels will be provided on the north quay. In this way, the whole quay infrastructure of the port will be ready to satisfy the upcoming requirements or needs of companies associated with the hydrocarbon works making use of the adjacent land area we've mentioned before. In order to optimize the detailed engineering design and construction technology, a number of activities have been completed. These are the topographical and bathymetric surveys of the project area, geotechnical investigation of the area, environmental impact assessment, which includes a coastal impact assessment, an environmental baseline survey, basic designs of the major structures, and so on. Estimated cost of the project is 130 million euros, and completion of construction works end of 2021. Regarding the Poseidon Med II, CPA has an EU obligation to use alternative sources of energy and to facilitate LNG ship bunkering by 2025. In order to comply with this obligation, CPA has designated an area within the retained land of Lemesos Port Terminal 1. The planning of the facilities required, such as the LNG storage tanks, their loading and unloading platform with breasting and mooring door frames, is in progress. That's all from me. Thank you very much for listening.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My talk today will be related to ports, upgrading ports infrastructure for the LNG era. I'm from Organ Associates, which is a company specialized, a consultants company specialized in harbor master planning, harbor and marina design, port development, port strategy, port and sea transportation, coastal engineering, anything that has to do with the sea and environmental impact studies, and is active in the field for over 45 years. And active not only in Greece and Cyprus, but all over the world as well, as you can see from the dots here. Some projects, if I may show, related to LNG or to industrial applications, like the detailed construction design of the main access pier and the central loading platform, breasting dolphins, etc. For Malta, the area of Delimara, where an FSU is already installed there and operating to provide with natural gas the power plant of Malta. And this was for GNP AVAX, who did the construction. An older master plan of the new Vasilikos port. This is some 10 years, less than 10 years ago, there was a plan to concentrate all the industrial uses in the area of Vasilikos. That was for Cyprus Port Authority. Or in Greece, the maritime and industrial area of the Platigiali area. This is actually the first private port designed and constructed in Greece, and it is operating. Now, the aim of this presentation and the aim of Poseidon Med is to adopt LNG as a maritime fuel. There are certain challenges that must be met and must be dealt with before being able to do that. I won't go into detail into this, but issues that have to be dealt is the availability of regulatory framework, which means lack of regulations for gas fuel ships, or lack of LNG bunkering operation standards, economic viability like high capital cost, or uncertainty of LNG prices versus LNG fuel price, technological feasibility in dealing with issues like large LNG fuel tanks, retrofitting feasibility, methane slip, which might have adverse results on the environment, safety risks. It's obvious what is safety risks, infrastructure availability, lack of bunkering infrastructure and facilities, lack of supply chain and distribution network, and also, last but very important as well, public awareness. We've seen a lot of public not understanding the issue of LNG, being feared of the use of LNG, etc. So public incentives, public perception is very important. All these are dealt by different and must be dealt by different responsible parties. I don't go into more detail in that, but the advantages of LNG as a maritime fuel is compliant with environmental regulations as of IMO, reduced emissions, this is what everybody understands, particulates, sulfur, nitrogen oxides, etc. Ship engines produce less noise pollution and have lower maintenance needs, cheaper maritime fuel with higher energy efficiency compared to other fossil fuels, because this is a fossil fuel as well. So we consider LNG as an answer to the question of sustainability. as it deals with air pollution, reduces air pollution, it promotes environmental responsibility, sustainable infrastructures, and sustainable interaction between port and the city, which is very important because in most cases the port is surrounded by the city. Just a picture of where we have LNG stations, LNG import stations in the eastern, southeastern Europe and southeastern Mediterranean. As we can see, there are some in Turkey. In Greece, it's only Rebithous at the moment, which is operated by DESFA, and others are planned in Alexandroupolis and in Kavala. In Malta, the one I showed earlier, in Sicily, in Italy, in the Adriatic, some stations, and in Cyprus, it's planned for the area of Vasiliko. Now, going into Poseidon Med II, for which Mr. Polychroniou and Mr. Florentin said the introductory and presented the overall scope of the project. I will concentrate on the activities that are related to ports and related to the role of Rogan Associates, like the updating of the ports master plans, some supporting baseline engineering studies, preliminary engineering design, which is basic, that means basic design of the additional ports infrastructure, final construction design of additional port infrastructure, tender documents, and also, of course, environmental, some other activities to which Rogan is not the leader but participates, has strong input in environmental safety and detailed site planning studies and the environmental studies. If we see it in a chart and see that all these are ongoing, and some of them have already been finished, Activity 6, environmental safety and detailed site planning studies. This is done together with Lloyds and DESFA. And Activity 8, which is supporting baseline engineering studies. And when we say supporting engineering, I'll go into detail a bit later what it is. All these give input to the update of the port's master plan, together with conceptual engineering design at this level. And then at this stage, it is the updated master plan of the port is submitted to the relevant authorities for approval. Then, after the initial approvals of the site planning, we go into basic engineering designs, final engineering designs, and of course, between going to final engineering, we have to have the final environmental design, which will give the environmental terms before proceeding with the final construction design and tender documents. So the outcome of Poseidon Med II will be a set of designs and tender documents ready to be implemented, ready to be constructed. What are we designing? Of course, we are designing the appropriate harbor infrastructure to provide berthing places for LNG carriers and for LNG barges, like quay wall jetties, loading platforms, breasting and mooring dolphins, catwalks, revetment works to protect the land areas from the wave overtopping, some modification and foundations on the land area, and also the connection to the local national road networks. The necessary supporting studies to these engineering designs are wave disturbance studies, coastal impact studies, geotechnical investigations, bathymetric topographic surveys, economic studies, traffic impact studies, hazard and hazard studies, navigational simulations. These two are done by Lloyds. Environmental, of course, and social impact assessment, and of course, very important, needs to be done public consultation with agencies and authorities. And to show some results of some outcome of the Poseidon Med II for some Greek and Cypriot core ports. This is the port of Patras, and you can see on your left lower, this is the master plan of the south part of the port of Patras, where the small-scale LNG installation has been planned, as can be seen in the circle there, consisting of a land area with the land installations, which I'll show, a jetty, loading platform, and breasting and mooring dolphins. For this, wave study, wave simulation has already been implemented. Ship navigation study has also been implemented. And conceptual designs have also been done for the land area by DESFA and their subcontractor Tractable. I can show some pictures. Or here on your right side, you can see the jetty, the trestle, the loading platform, breasting and mooring dolphins. You can see also a typical layout of the C-type LNG tanks, the regasification unit, and some more detail for the land area arrangement. Track loading also has been planned for this particular installation, for track loading of LNG. So LNG will be provided either ship to ship or via trucks, or even directly by ships which will be berthed on this installation. Port of Iraklio in Crete is again one of the ports that are part of Poseidon Med II. There, the site for the LNG installation, small-scale LNG installation, has been planned for the tip of the existing pier, the most eastern pier, the Pier 5, and an extension to its east. A new extension will be constructed to the east of it to create a new berth for LNG carriers and to create also the necessary land arrangement, the land area. For this also, wave modeling, wave penetration has been done, and ship navigation has also been implemented. The port of Igoumenitsa, in the very northwestern part of it, a new land reclamation will be implemented, and a jetty, loading platform, resting and mooring dolphins, also this is in the circle you can see, to accommodate the small-scale LNG station and also the berthing place for the LNG carriers. The Bay of Igoumenitsa is an absolutely protected area, and we also saw it from the wave modeling, which we performed. A very minimal wave disturbance comes into the Bay of Igoumenitsa. And also it's quite far from from the city of Igoumenitsa or from any other installations, this area. For Limassol, the port of Limassol, as Nikos and Mr. Georgiou showed earlier, the LNG bunkering operation is planned for the inner side of the windward breakwater. There is a land area there, as can be seen, and then we see a jetty, breasting and mooring dolphins, etc., for the LNG carrier or for the barge. And also there are some small-scale LNG tanks on shore. For this, wave penetration model has also been done, and ship navigation, as can be seen in these two pictures on the right. For Piraeus, because it is so very near to the Revithousa, at the moment there is no extra infrastructure foreseen, but only some minor arrangements so that the LNG bunkering will be implemented via barges, ship-to-ship, barges that come from Revithousa. But also wave modeling and navigation modeling are being implemented for these areas as well in the inner port, the central port of Piraeus. And finally, although this is not part of the Poseidon Med II, Mr. Hadjigeorgiou also talked about it, a new jetty is planned in within the context of synergy, a new jetty in Vasiliko area which will accommodate berth for a permanently stationed FSRU which will provide LNG, and also an emergency shelter that Nikos spoke a lot of it. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Solomonides. And so now we'll have with us Mr. Arthur McWhinney, representing the Cyprus Shipping Chamber. And Mr. McWhinney will give us the view of an operator, and especially an operator involved in LNG bunkering ventures. Mr. McWhinney, the floor is yours.
Honored guests, organizers, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation to speak here today. It's a pleasure. Secondly, I was of course hoping that I would have our corporate director for energy projects speaking on my behalf, so I could be in the audience listening to him rather than speaking to you here today. However, it is my pleasure, and I hope to give you today an overview, as said earlier, with regard to a ship owner and a ship manager, as to the drivers, why, as to the drivers of what we're doing today to try and instill on everyone here why there is a need for change, why that change is predominantly in the shipping market, in the shipping eternity with regard to LNG as a fuel for the future. The first slide is the driver, the main driver being legislation. And if we look at legislation over the last few years, legislation has come about basically on environmental issues. These environmental issues are of course driven by people. The reasoning, the why we need to clean our planet. There are different types of regulations that drive us through on a specific timescale within that road. And we need to look at that with regard to the different capabilities within our industry and how we're going to move that forward for the future. I will not repeat, I don't think there's a need to repeat the regulations. They have been said and they are well known within the industry, and especially those who are on the committee here in Cyprus, on the Marine Committee and the Technical Committee, when we talk about fuels of the future and regulations coming into place. The choices. There's a number of choices out there going into the future as we look for this change to meet those regulations. Those choices will depend on the type of vessel you operate and how you operate and where you operate them. So as an organization, we feel that looking at the world, or the ships that are in trading the world at this moment in time, have specific target areas for the fueling of LNG as an initial part of our strategy. Initial part of our strategy as a company, an initial part of our strategy to assist and be part of the innovation for LNG bunkering and LNG fuel ships for the future. We use this slide that gives us a very overview as to the different types of fuels that are available to us, and we use this as part of our evaluation, or as part of that evaluation, as to what is available now and what could be available in the future, and the timelines that we look at in the view that LNG now is the dominant factor for what we need to do in the marine industry. We've also looked at how LNG will affect the bottom line. There is a cost element with regard to transportation, cost element with regard to having engines, as well as infrastructure within ships to run that. However, when we look at the other fuels that are going to be available, or will be available, or that is currently available, we see that it makes economic sense on a maintenance and fuel basis to look at LNG as a preferred provider for fuel in transportation. The crossroads. Where we are today, the need for LNG, for a cleaner burning fuel, is evident, I think, to all of us. However, how do we get there? Natural gas is abundant. We know that. We have it on our back door. How can we develop that to complete the infrastructure in providing something for the future? I'm being rather generalistic here, because this is a generalistic topic when we look at what it is that we have and how we can develop that. But I'm also looking at the drivers with regard to why, and then I will come into very soon with regard to what we are doing and how we we vision the future with regard to LNG. It was talked about earlier with regard to the cost. The cost value is a significant part with regard to the commercialization and the cost of fuels. If the cost of bunkering LNG is disproportionate to the change, guess what? We're not going to do it. Or it's going to be very difficult for people to make that change. We heard about the Boston Group, and yes, we have studied that as well, with regard to the prices of oil going up. And we believe that to be true. When we look at where we are today with regard to bunker prices, oil prices, and how that will develop with regard to oil-producing nations, there is a need for them to increase their prices. It is not sustainable at the way we're running at this moment in time. So you will have a commercial change with regard to LNG becoming a fuel that, on the commercial side, will make sense to change over. We see the evolving infrastructure around the world with regard to LNG, and that infrastructure is part of that build-up on ships being, people changing their perception on ships being able to transit the world with LNG as their preferred fuel. There was a quote here, I think somebody mentioned 30% of fuel in 20 years will be done by LNG, but if I take the prediction by Exxon, it says there's an increase by at least, where we have now 1%, we are likely to have 10% by 2040. Doesn't sound significant, but in the real world development, it is. Snapshot. If you look at the LNG vessels in the world today, you will see that there's an increase in the number of vessels being built, and then increase significantly in the amount of terminals, receiving terminals, liquefaction terminals that are being built as part of this drive, as part of this infrastructure for the future. This allows us to go back to that chicken and egg situation where you need to start to develop that in order to be able to look at the bunkering side of it, to make it practical for ship owners and ship operators to manage their vessels. Cruise lines, liner services are the most significant areas, or the first build-up areas where we see this happening. There are today, to my knowledge, and I checked yesterday, 5 bunkering LNG vessels afloat. The Schulte Group, along with their partners, are building an LNG vessel for bunkering. That vessel will go on time charter in the Baltic, and it will be in the water next year. What I wanted to look at, and what I wanted to tell you and give you the practicalities, that this is not something futuristic anymore. The driving factors are already there, and the driving factors are people are moving in that direction. The vessel itself is being constructed in Korea, and there's a few details for you with regard to that element of it. It will be the largest LNG bunkering vessel in the world when she comes out next year. When we look at that, the reasoning behind that build was because of the commercial side of what it is required for that bunkering vessel in that specific area. So most people are looking at bunkering with regard to what is required, specific areas, and the trading patterns that are required from that. Details I can pass to you later on if necessary. With any type of build, new type of vessel, there is a lot of work to do with regard to regulations, a lot of work with regard to classification, a lot of work with regard to ensuring that the safety of this is adequate and that people will take it up. It has been in development for over 2 years. Now we are into construction. There are technologies within the system that are unique to what it is required to do, and it's patented by us and, of course, the manufacturers. And I'll quickly flick through some slides, because I see my time is up, with regard to when we look at the technologies, we should consider that the technologies are here. And in the theme, if we look at the theme of Maritime Cyprus, with regard to shipping, yesterday's world, tomorrow's today, we are in a position to make a road with regard to LNG. We're looking at how the transfer of this fuel from one ship to another is going to take place safely. We're talking, and have been talking, training being a very big factor with regard to understanding the process of transfer, and also with regard to ships that run on LNG, how to ensure that the crew do that safely. Here's a little bit more on the construction of the vessel. Details will be available should you wish to do so. Significant elements with regard to the jigsaw arm, as they call it, or with regard to the fueling arm, and the infrastructure with regard to refueling the vessel itself, either through SDS operations or from a shore platform. All that has been developed and built into that design. If you look at a range of dockside to the bottom of the waterline, 28 meter arm length can be achieved. Technology with regard to ensuring safety with the transfer element of it is already on the way and in place, designed with key players that we have teamed up with as part of that design. It happened before, don't need to tell you again. Wind to coal, and it took about 100 years to do that, they say. Then coal to oil, that took approximately, I think, 10, 20 years. How long will it take us to go from fossil fuel with regard to where we are now to LNG? And that's a discussion we want to have with key players in what we are doing right now. I hope I've given you some insight as to what an owner is doing. We are doing it, we're doing it now. It is not something that has not begun. It is here. The reality is here. You, your children, are the drivers of this for environmental reasons. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Arthur, for sharing this valuable experience you have already with your LNG bunkering venture and the holistic approach you have to things. So now we will invite Mr. Libor Krokska, perhaps I do not pronounce it well. He's the head of European Bank for Reconstruction and Development in Nicosia, and will give us a view of how EBRD can assist in general investment, and in particular we'll see later on LNG.
Okay,
So
thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and first of all let me to thank the organizers for inviting me here and giving me the opportunity to present both my institution, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, what we do in Cyprus, and during the presentation I will use example of what we have done so far, how that could be also applicable to introduction of LNG and helping this sector to develop here on the island. First of all, what is European Bank for Reconstruction and Development? We are a multilateral development institution owned by now 67 shareholders, with China becoming our latest shareholder in January this year. And we have a capital base of 30 billion euro, being AAA-rated financial institution, which obviously means that our financing can be provided at appropriate maturities and pricing for projects as they arise, and we are not limited by our credit rating. We have a specific mandate as a development institution to work in 36 countries in European Union neighborhood, including 12 EU member states, Cyprus one among them, but also Greece. And most recently, our expansion was to southeastern Mediterranean countries such as Morocco, Tunisia, Egypt, Jordan, and one country in your neighborhood which is not still on this map, and that's Lebanon, where we started operating just a few weeks ago. Our institution has invested in almost 5,000 projects, and I can see that there is a typo on this slide. It's not 115 million, but 115 billion euros. We invest mostly in the private sector, so 80% of our investments are in the private sector, but in some of the less developed countries, we also provide financing for the state sector. Here in Cyprus, our investment is 100% for the private sector. We are actually not allowed to finance the government and government-owned entities. So in case there would be financing needed for port infrastructure, our ability to finance it is only through private concessions, such as was the case of Limassol Port. And similarly, we are also very keen on investments in equities. So we are not providing just loans and guarantees, but we also make equity investments, and I will come later into it. You can see that the range of enterprises, both by size and by sector, is quite wide, and I will not go into more detail of examples, and rather provide more detail about what exactly EBRD can provide. Probably here what is important is to stress that European Bank for Reconstruction and Development is a bank, so we have a mandate to provide financing for financially viable projects through commercially priced and structured loans and viable equity investments. Of course, we have very close cooperation with governments and multilateral organizations as well as European Union, and European Union in fact is one of the largest donors co-financing technical assistance alongside our projects. In Cyprus, we are active since 2014. We were invited by the government of the Republic of Cyprus to help with post-crisis reconstruction and especially rehabilitation of the financial sector. And our operational priorities were to, as I said, help the financial sector, support the privatization program, including PPPs and Limassol Port concession, and support non-financial corporations and small and medium-sized enterprises. To date, we have invested almost 250 million euros, including equity in Bank of Cyprus, Hellenic Bank. We have provided financing for maritime sector, and through that financing also Limassol Port concession. We have one of the most active trade finance programs among 35 EBRD countries' operations, provided financing for green economy investments and advisory programs for small and medium enterprises. So how all of that relates to LNG and how that could be used here in Cyprus? Obviously, bank recapitalization for us was the most important and the earliest intervention. But I would hope that we would be able to also co-finance investments in new LNG-fueled ships in Cyprus or registered here in Cyprus, because through this we would be not only helping to improve environmental standards, but also helping local banks such as maybe Hellenic Bank to expand into new types of financing where there is a big scope for and also big need for investments. Our trade finance facilitation program, I will not go into details how exactly it operates. We provide guarantees for all types of trade instruments, be it letter of credits, bank payment guarantees, bin bonds, performance bonds, advance payment guarantees. Could also be used for investment in LNG. So, for example, in 2015, trade finance of the deal, again, among all the EBRD countries' operations, was for export of construction services from Cyprus to Egypt. But similarly, reconstruction and expansion of Vasiliko port for LNG will be potentially using international construction companies that could benefit from our trade finance support. Similarly, we have provided trade finance support for the import of a floating dock from Ukraine to Cyprus, and again I could imagine that some private operators would be importing equipment for those investments that could benefit from trade finance support and helping to make those projects more viable and more profitable. In the maritime sector, we have provided loan to Interorion Ship Management, which is a leading ship management company headquartered here in Cyprus. Through the financing for Interorion, we have also supported their investment in Limassol Port concession. But it also shows that we have experience working with directly with local shipping companies, and we are very keen to have further discussions about financing of LNG fueled ships. On the renewable energy projects, even though they might not be seen as LNG related, I would like to highlight that our transaction for photovoltaic power plants was actually a benchmark transaction for non-recourse financing. So here the structure which we have used was really pioneering new structure of financing for Cyprus, which could be replicated also for financing of LNG projects. And last but not least, I know that when people think about LNG, people think about large projects in the size of hundreds of millions of euros. But for EBRD, small businesses, small and medium enterprise support is also very important. And not only we have worked now with more than 60 companies facilitating advisory services, and those resulted in, on average for those projects that were completed, in about a quarter increase in employment and a third increase in turnover. But they also include companies which are active in maritime sector. So even those smaller companies which do not seem natural beneficiaries of this, what I would probably call strategic change in the maritime sector or energy sector, could benefit, and we are ready to provide advice how those smaller companies could be assisted. Now, for my contacts, I provided on my presentation, which I assume will be distributed, contact details. We have office in Nicosia, and one of our colleagues is here in the audience, so you can also approach either me or him during the breaks or later in the session to discuss any specific financing you might have in mind. So thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we will now call Mr. Steve Esau to the podium. Steve is the General Manager for Sea LNG, and he will talk to us about the reality of shifting to LNG.
Thank you, Panos, for that introduction, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, I'd just like to thank Bunkinet for the invitation to CLNG to speak here. A few words about CLNG, I'll talk more later, but CLNG is a multi-sectoral industry association whose focus is accelerating the uptake of LNG as a marine fuel. So there are essentially two things I'd like to talk about. First is the reasons why LNG is a sensible choice as a marine fuel, and then to give you all an overview of developments to date on the status of LNG as a marine fuel. How am I? Sorry, try to move the slides forward. Okay, great, thanks. So why LNG? And I think it's clear that society is no longer prepared to accept the levels of pollution, both from the marine sector and also the terrestrial sector. Pollution from the shipping industry affects, I think, roughly about 250 million people living in port communities, and a sort of calculation, a recent calculation shows a cost of around about 12 billion euros per year in terms of the negative economic impacts of pollution from the shipping industry. We feel strongly, and I think many in the shipping community feel strongly, that it's time that the shipping industry recognizes this, accepts this, and actually makes moves to make things better. The intent of the IMO is very clear, as you've heard, with the sulfur cap being implemented on marine fuels in 2020. And also the actions of IMO member states on introducing the much more stringent ecozones in a number of regions around the world, and plans to introduce more. So why LNG? And I think this has been covered by a number of speakers. Clearly, LNG has a far better emissions performance. It solves the SOx issue, deals with the majority of NOx emissions. LNG fueled engines emit 0 to limited amounts of particulate matter, and we can expect regulations to further regulations to be developing in that area. And it's a major step forward for CO2. I mean, there are a variety of numbers out there. Our analysis suggests that LNG as a marine fuel can reduce emissions from between 10 and 20% using best practice and technologies, with a potential to increase that to about 25% as technologies develop. I think the key message that I'd like to stress is that because of LNG's very good emissions performance, it essentially future-proofs investments by shipping owners and others involved in the LNG supply chain against further regulatory pressures or decisions. We can see, though the step from 3.5 to 0.5 sulfur in the marine sector is clearly significant, if you look at the limits on sulfur in terrestrial transportation, which are about 500 times stricter, you have a very clear idea of where regulation may be heading. The other points I think that I'd like to stress are LNG is economically viable for shipping, both within ECAs and also for shipping routes that are deeper sea shipping routes that spend about 50% of their times in ECAs, and that's at sort of current fuel prices and current capex levels. It's widely available. LNG is available in about between 50 and 60 countries worldwide now. There's a growing bunkering infrastructure, and this LNG infrastructure is focused on the ports where traditional air or current liquid fuel bunkering currently takes place. So yes, so it's happening now, and here are a few examples. If you look at the left-hand image, you see the tote container lines, which are operating out of Jacksonville in Florida in the US, being bunkered. These container vessels have been in operation since about 2015. In the middle there, at the top, you see the Angie LNG bunkering vessel, which went into operation in Zeebrugge in April of this year. Bottom middle, the Clean Marine Energy barge, which will be providing marine bunker operations when it comes into operation towards the end of this year. On the right-hand side, you can see one of Carnival cruise ships being bunkered for hoteling purposes at one of the cruise ferry terminals in Europe. And bottom right is the Shell's Cardis LNG vessel, which was christened a few days ago in Rotterdam. So, some numbers, and there are a variety of numbers out there. What we can see now is that the current LNG fleet numbers around about 120 LNG fuel vessels. Most of these are operating within the ecozones, but we're seeing a build out into the sort of deeper sea shipping space. We've got about 112 confirmed new builds, and there are about 90 odd LNG ready ships. So these ships are ships which can be converted to running on LNG, either in operation or on order. I think the interesting thing is if you look at statistics from DNVGL, you'll see that in terms of new build, as a new build option, there are larger numbers of LNG fuel vessels being commissioned on order compared to the competing scrubber option. So into the deep sea shipping space. So cruise lines, we see, I think there are about orders for about 16 cruise line vessels. The first of which is coming into operation in about I think 2018. Container ships, 3 are in operation, further 12 on order. Tankers, there are about 30 in operation, or 35 in operation, and a further 30 on order. So we're really seeing a build out of LNG fueled vessels into the deep sea shipping space. So in parallel with this, and as everyone is aware of the sort of chicken and egg cliche, in order for LNG to be a sensible choice for shipping lines, we need to have the infrastructure to support that. And again, a key message I think is that there's no shortage of LNG. In fact, there's a massive expansion of LNG capacity expected over the next 5 to 7 years, with a build out from the US, from Qatar, from Russia, from Australia, and perhaps later in this period in East Africa. There's a vast resource of natural gas. It's already widely available in about 150 locations around the world. Of the top 10 conventional oil bunkering ports, 9 either offer LNG for bunkering already or have firm plans to do so by 2020. By the end of 2017, 6 LNG bunker vessels will be in operation, and this is key because the availability of bunkering vessels really changes the game for the shipping industry. It allows shipping operators to bunker in a similar way to which they currently bunker. It allows flexibility and much quicker operations. So beginning of the year, just to give you an idea, there was 1 bunker vessel in operation globally. By the end of this year, there will be 6. There'll be a further vessel in China in 2018. Shell reckons that in about 5 years, there will be between, I think, up to 30 bunker vessels in operation in about 25 major global ports. In addition to this, we're seeing new bunkering hubs developing around projects which are leveraging existing LNG infrastructure. So we're seeing this happen in India, we're seeing this happen in Europe, in Spain. And we're seeing growing synergies. The LNG industry is changing, and we're seeing growing synergies between the developments of small-scale LNG, regas facilities, and marine bunkering, particularly, for example, in the Caribbean and East Asia. A few words about CLNG. So as I mentioned, we're a multi-sectoral industry coalition focused on accelerating the uptake of LNG as a marine fuel. We have members ranging from suppliers to bunker operators to shipping lines to OEMs, shipyards, ports and class societies. This is all based around the recognition that in order to drive a systemic change and the systemic change that we need collaboration across the whole value chain. So we have a strategic and commercial focus. We're focused on addressing the barriers to the uptake of, or the commercial barriers to the uptake of LNG as a marine fuel. These include the necessary developments in LNG bunkering, LNG market maturity, the capex challenges that we face, and the sort of evolving regulatory environment. Our key focus at the moment is really on helping the shipping industry understand LNG as a marine fuel and giving it the confidence to make the necessary investments. So I think that ends it for me.
Thank you, Steve, for your quite useful feedback. So we're now going to practically have a question session, a panel discussion on this. So I will start right away with a question to Mr. McQueenie, so to Arthur. So practically we have seen the wide experience the Schulte Group presents with regard to LNG and LNG banking in particular. But talking also from an operator point of view, we would like to have your cold-blooded view about the necessary prerequisites to drive us away from simple compliance solutions like scrubbers in favor of LNG, and assuming that the price will still be competitive. What will be the key elements that could drive operators away from the easiest solution towards more sustainable options?
Try to be diplomatic in my answer. First of all, is there any scrubber manufacturers out there today? Yeah. No? That's good. Secondly, any of you who operate vessels with scrubbers today? That's good. When I look, or when we've evaluated the use or the technology with regard to scrubbers, we see that it's more of an add-on technology to something that's existing. When we look at it with regard to what we are going to gain from that, and that's only a reduction in actual particles, reduction from SOx and NOx elements of it. What are we actually doing with scrubbers? Are we gaining anything as an organization or as a company when you look at the cost effectiveness of this going forward? Bunkering prices is a significant part of that. But you have no change in your maintenance costs. In fact, you probably have an increase with regard to more equipment that's needed for scrubbers, as you would do to a certain extent if you had LNG. However, there's a payback factor. We didn't see any clear efficiency changes with regard to maintaining the status quo with regard to 3.5 sulfur content fuel. We also looked at it with regard to, or we discussed the point with regard to how available will this fuel be in 10 years from now? As predominantly most of us considering MGO or diesel as our way forward, less than 0.1%. So diplomatically, I would say it's an option, but it should be your last option. So, if you want my point of view.
Thank you very much for this. So, going to the CPA, the Cyprus Port Authority, we have already seen during your presentation, Mr. Hadjigeorgiou, we have seen all the plans you have, but I would like to have also your let's say succinct view of what CPA has already done and how actively will CPA contribute to this effort to LNG, to the gas era shift.
you hear me now? In the improvement and expansion of Lemessos Port, Terminal 2 at Vasiliko, which is in the heart of the energy center, shows its willingness to play an important role in the energy sector. As I have mentioned in my presentation, CPA has an obligation to facilitate LNG ship bunkering by 2025 at Limassol Port first, which is the major port of the island. For these, basic designs have been prepared by our consultants. We have designated an area for this. And the other thing that I would like to mention is that the option is open for LNG ship bunkering, not only at Limassol, but at Vasiliko port. And here I must say that the planned jetty for DEFA, where the FSRU will be located, can offer this facility from there for ships visiting the port of Vasiliko. So it's a matter of demand and supply, and CPA is targeting to be ahead of these things and keep up with the new technology. I don't know if it's have an answer your.
All right. Thank you very much for your input on this, and trying to keep the interest high, a money question to Mr. Koska. So we are talking about the gap between simple compliance